The flames roared to life in Oxford, and Thomas Cranmer did the unthinkable. He thrust his right hand, the very hand that had betrayed his faith, directly into the fire. "This hand hath offended," he cried, holding it steady as the flesh blackened and burned away before the rest of his body was consumed. This shocking act of self-punishment turned an old man's execution into one of the most brutal and symbolic deaths in Tudor history. To understand the fire, you have to understand the man. Thomas Cranmer wasn't born a revolutionary. He was a quiet scholar at Cambridge University, a man of books and deep thought. He never sought high office. In fact, when he heard King Henry VIII wanted to make him Archbishop of Canterbury, he delayed his return to England for 7 weeks, perhaps hoping the king might simply change his mind. But Henry didn't forget. The king had a problem, his great matter. He desperately needed to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon so he could marry Anne Boleyn and get a male heir. The Pope said no. Cranmer, a theologian with reformist ideas, gave the king another way. He argued that the king's marriage to Catherine was against God's law from the start, and that Henry, as king, had power over the church in his own realm. This was exactly the solution Henry was looking for. In 1533, Cranmer became archbishop. Almost right away, he declared Henry's marriage to Catherine null and void, and validated the king's secret marriage to a now pregnant Anne Boleyn. With that one move, Cranmer didn't just change who was in the royal bed, he severed England from the Roman Catholic Church. It was a schism that would define the nation's future and, ultimately, sign his own death warrant. As Archbishop, Cranmer became the chief architect of the new Church of England. Henry VIII was never a true Protestant. He just wanted Catholicism without a pope. But Cranmer carefully used his position to plant the seeds of Reformation. He pushed for the Bible to be translated into English, placing it in churches across the country for everyone to read for the first time. His greatest achievement was the Book of Common Prayer, first published in 1549 while Henry's Protestant son, Edward VI, was king. For the first time, church services, from baptisms to funerals, were in the language of the common people, not the Latin only priests could understand. This book wasn't just a manual, it was the heartbeat of a new English faith, and its words shaped the spiritual lives of generations. Cranmer guided the church toward a fully Protestant identity, creating clear doctrines like the 42 Articles. He was at the peak of his influence, a quiet revolutionary who had changed the soul of a nation. But the political winds in Tudor England could turn on a dime, and a storm was coming. The Protestant momentum slammed to a halt in 1553 with the death of young King Edward VI. After a failed 9-day plot to put the Protestant Lady Jane Grey on the throne, a plan Cranmer reluctantly supported, the crown passed to Henry VIII's eldest daughter, Mary. Mary was the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, the Queen Cranmer had cast aside. She was a fiercely devout Catholic who had watched in horror as her father and half-brother dismantled the church she loved. Her reign had one single, driving purpose: to reverse the Reformation and drag England back to Rome. And Thomas Cranmer, the man who annulled her mother's marriage, declared her illegitimate, and symbolized the entire English Reformation, was her #1 target. He was arrested for treason and heresy, along with other key Protestant bishops like Hugh Latimer and Nicholas Ridley. He was thrown into the grim Bocardo prison in Oxford. From a prison tower, he was forced to watch his friends, Latimer and Ridley, burn at the stake. An eyewitness reported Latimer's famous last words to Ridley as "the flames rose." "Be of good comfort, Master Ridley, and play the man. We shall this day light such a candle, by God's grace, in England, as I trust shall never be put out." That candle was lit with their lives, and now the Queen turned her full attention to the man who had started it all. What happened next wasn't just a trial. It was a campaign of psychological warfare designed to completely break Thomas Cranmer. For 2 years, the 66-year-old Archbishop languished in prison, facing endless interrogations. They didn't just want to kill him, they wanted to discredit him. They wanted him to recant, to publicly take back his Protestant beliefs and admit his life's work was a lie. And under the crushing pressure, the old man cracked. Between January and February 1556, Cranmer, isolated and fearing for his life, signed several recantations. The first few were carefully worded, but his tormentors pushed harder. Finally, he completely collapsed, signing a full repudiation of Protestant theology and affirming his belief in papal supremacy. He had signed away everything he stood for. Under church law, a heretic who recanted was supposed to be spared the fire. His execution was even postponed. It seemed like his submission had worked, but Queen Mary wasn't interested in canon law. She was interested in revenge. She wasn't going to pardon the man she hated most. A new execution date was set. March 21st, 1556. His recantations had meant nothing. He was going to burn anyway. The morning of March 21st, 1556, was cold and rainy. The authorities had planned for Cranmer to deliver one final, public recantation at the stake, but the miserable weather forced them to move the sermon indoors to the University Church of St. Mary the Virgin. A platform was set up for him, and as the pale, defeated-looking Cranmer knelt to pray, an eyewitness said he wept so bitterly it moved a great number to tears. He began his sermon as expected, urging obedience to the Queen. The crowd leaned in, waiting for the final, humiliating confession. But then, everything changed. As he neared the end, Cranmer went off script. His voice, once weak, grew powerful. He declared, "And now I come to the great thing which so much troubleth my conscience, more than anything that ever I did or said in my whole life." A hush fell over the church. This was it. But the words that came next were a thunderclap. And that is the setting abroad of a writing contrary to the truth, which now here I renounce and refuse as things written with my hand, contrary to the truth which I thought in my heart, and written for fear of death. He then renounced every recantation he had signed. To the absolute shock of his captors, he defiantly proclaimed his Protestant faith and finished with the ultimate insult. "And as for the Pope, I refuse him as Christ's enemy and Antichrist with all his false doctrine." The church erupted into chaos. He was dragged from the platform and rushed toward the stake. The propaganda event had backfired spectacularly. The broken old man had found his courage, and now he would face a death more brutal than anyone imagined. He was taken to the same spot in Oxford where Latimer and Ridley had died, a site now marked by a cross on Broad Street. Stripped to his shirt, an iron chain was fastened around his waist, binding him to the stake as wood was piled around him. As the executioner lit the pyre, Cranmer did something extraordinary. Stretching out his right arm, the very hand that had signed the recantations, he thrust it directly into the fire. Eyewitnesses heard him cry out with a loud voice, "This hand hath offended." Another reported him calling it that unworthy hand. He held it there, steady and unmoving, as the fire consumed it. Onlookers watched in horrified awe as his hand burned before the flames even touched the rest of his body. This wasn't just the standard agony of burning alive. This was a deliberate act of self-punishment, a final, physical penance. The symbolism was unmistakable. The part of him that had sinned would be destroyed first. Only after his hand was gone did the flames engulf his body. His last words were reportedly a cry to heaven, "Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. I see the heavens open and Jesus standing at the right hand of God." Queen Mary wanted Cranmer's execution to be the final nail in the coffin of the English Reformation. Instead, it became one of its greatest triumphs. The story of Cranmer's final defiance and that unforgettable image of his burning hand spread like wildfire. What was meant to be a spectacle of shame became a powerful story of courage and redemption, immortalized in works like Fox's Book of Martyrs. He was transformed from a wavering political figure into a Protestant hero. His death didn't crush the Reformation, it fueled it. When Mary died just 2 years later, her Protestant half-sister Elizabeth I took the throne and restored the Church of England, built on the very foundations Cranmer had laid. His legacy wasn't one of weakness, but of a deeply human man who faltered under immense pressure, yet ultimately found the strength to play the man and die for what he believed. Thomas Cranmer's execution was a calculated act of cruelty that backfired in the most spectacular way. It's a story of a man who was broken and then remade in his final hour. Queen Mary meant for the flames in Oxford to extinguish a movement. But in a great historical irony, the brutal, symbolic sacrifice of Thomas Cranmer's unworthy hand lit a candle that would never be put out. If you found this look into one of history's most dramatic executions compelling, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more stories. And let us know in the comments, what piece of brutal history should we explore next? Thanks for watching.